Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to give you a 10,000 foot overview of the guardianship process. Now, you remember yesterday, I did a 10,000 foot view of the Marchman Act. Today, we're going to talk about guardianship. So, what is the guardianship? I mean, it's sort of something that most of us, if you're familiar with the term, would associate with elderly people. And I mean, it has traditionally been used for elderly people when they had issues, physical, mental health issues, and you needed to get control over them. So you could start making decisions that were in their best interest because they no longer could. About 10 years ago, my brilliant wife came up with the idea of using guardianship for much, much younger people. The individual we're typically trying to get into treatment is 25 to 45, and came up with a brilliant idea that we should use guardianship for those individuals where perhaps they didn't meet criteria for a Marchman Act. Perhaps there was no substance use. Perhaps we couldn't prove substance use. But perhaps, even more importantly, we needed more control. Because as I've said in other videos, Marchman is very narrow. Guardianship is very broad in terms of the control that it gives you. So, I mean, what really is guardianship? If you're like me and a child of the 80s, you'll remember the movie Back to the Future. And in that movie, Marty McFly jumps in his DeLorean time machine and goes back in time. Think of the guardianship as a legal time machine. It's a legal DeLorean. And what it does is it allows you to turn the clock back. Because what happens is that when you're over 18, you're considered an adult. That means you can do things, you can buy houses, cars, get married, make medical decisions, control your own finances, basically control your own life. And if you have a behavioral health issue, sometimes those decisions are not what we would consider objectively rational. And that's a problem. So what the guardianship process does is it allows us to jump in our legal time machine, go back in time to a time when your loved one was not considered an adult. They were a minor, right, under 18. And that means you can start making decisions for them. So we love guardianship because it controls a bunch of different things. And I've got my list in front of me. But long story short is, here are the 12 things that you can control with the guardianship, which you cannot control, with the exception of the medical issue, with Marchman Act. So you have the right to vote, the right to marry, the right to contract, defend lawsuits, travel, have a driver's license, choose where you live, your residence, make medical and or mental health decisions, seek employment, your social environment, in other words, who you spend time with, apply for government benefits, manage property. So if there are finances, there's money involved, we want to get some control over that so you don't, use it for silly purposes. So it's really, really broad. And sometimes we'd love to do a guardianship with a Marchman Act. And I'm going to explain to you why we might do that. So you may recall from yesterday's video, I told you there's an ex parte section of the Marchman Act, which means I can get somebody picked up normally within the day. That we don't use the ex parte section of the guardianship. It is there, but we don't really use it. So for our purposes, presume that there is no ex parte. But there is what's known as the ETG, Emergency Temporary Guardianship. And that is a 90-day court order, a bit like the Marchman Act, which is a 90-day court order, but it's granted on an emergency basis. And normally, depending on how busy the courts are, my team can get into court within 24 to 72 hours. It does not require an expert opinion, and normally the court will make a ruling based on, normally it's the parents, all right? I had a case where husband and wife, and the husband was having all kinds of issues, and the wife was the witness we put on. I don't even think we got halfway through a testimony, and the judge said, okay, I heard enough. I'm granting this thing. So we can file a petition to court for an emergency temporary guardianship when we need emergency relief. A bit like in the Marchman Act. When we need emergency relief, we can request it. At the same time, we're going to file the petition for emergency temporary guardianship. We're going to file a petition for incapacity and a petition for permanent guardianship. And once that is filed, while the ETG is pending, even if it's granted or not granted, the court's going to appoint what's known as an examining committee, which is 3 experts. These are 3 court-appointed experts who are going to determine if this temporary guardianship is going to become permanent. And if it is, then great. And then the court's going to, the experts are going to recommend to the court which of these rights that I've talked about are going to be taken away. Look, think of this as an a la carte menu. We may not need to control property, but we may need, obviously control over medical decisions. you will go to treatment because the guardian says so. We'll have access to your medical records because the guardian needs to know what's going on in that treatment center and if you're doing what needs to be done. Remember, you can't necessarily get all that information with a Marchman Act. It's just an order that says you will go to treatment. And so guardianship is this amazing tool that we really love to use when we really need control, because Marchman Act is good for only 90 days, which we can renew, but I got to go back to court every 90 days. Whereas a guardianship, once it's granted, once a permanent guardianship is granted, it's there for as long as we need it, until the point in time where where your loved one is in a position where we can ask the court to restore their capacity. In other words, give them back the rights that we've taken away through the guardianship process. So it's a really powerful tool, but it's really good when we do it with a Marchman Act, because Marchman Act is really quick. So if I file an ex parte petition under the Marchman Act Part 1, I go back into court on the guardianship, and while the ex parte order is out there, I'm going into court on the guardianship to get an emergency temporary guardianship. So now, in theory, we have two courts we can run to. Gives us tons of control, tons of power over this person when we really need to make decisions so we can save them. So that is the 10,000-foot overview of the guardianship, a really key piece of our piece of our arsenal against the fight, to save people. So I want to share that with you, and I appreciate you tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.